In 2026, you've heard it all before. Market crash coming, dollar collapse imminent, hyperinflation around the corner, bank runs next month. For 15 years, the warnings never stopped. And for 15 years, the system kept running. So when the actual crisis arrives, nobody believes it. That's not irony. That's design. The financial media operates on a simple model. Fear generates clicks. Clicks generate revenue. Catastrophe sells better than stability. So every correction becomes a crash. Every policy shift becomes collapse. Every risk becomes inevitable disaster. The incentive isn't accuracy, it's attention. And attention requires escalation. In 2008, the warnings were real. Lehman fell. AIG needed rescue. The global financial system nearly froze. People who listened early moved assets, reduced leverage, survived intact. But after 2008, something changed. The warnings didn't stop, they accelerated. Every year brought new predictions. 2011, Euro collapse. 2013, Fed taper tantrum. 2015, China hard landing. 2018, trade war recession. 2020, pandemic depression. 2022, inflation spiral. Each warning carried the same urgency. Each deadline passed without catastrophe. By 2026, the result is predictable. The public stopped listening, not because the risks disappeared, because the signal drowned in noise. If you're watching this wondering why everyone ignored the obvious signs, stay with me. Because the mechanism that creates this blindness is structural, not accidental. This isn't new. History shows that populations can be conditioned to ignore danger through repetition. The story of the boy who cried wolf is a warning about this exact pattern. But the financial version is more sophisticated. It's not one liar crying wolf. It's an entire industry built on crying wolf professionally. Analysts get paid whether their predictions hit or miss. Media outlets profit from fear regardless of outcome. The system rewards the warning, not the accuracy. In the 1970s, gold bugs predicted hyperinflation every single year. They were right once in 1979, but they'd been wrong for the entire decade before. By the time inflation spiked, most people had tuned them out. The signal was real, but it was buried under years of false alarms. Those who acted early looked paranoid. Those who waited looked rational, until they didn't. The same pattern appeared before the 2008 crisis. A handful of analysts warned about subprime mortgages as early as 2005. They were dismissed as perma-bears, doomers, perennial pessimists. The warnings continued through 2006 and 2007. Housing kept rising. Credit kept flowing. The predictions looked foolish right up until September 2008. Then they looked obvious, but by then, it was too late to act. What made 2008 different from the false alarms wasn't the warning itself. It was the underlying mechanics. But those mechanics were invisible to most observers. Credit default swaps, collateralized debt obligations, synthetic derivatives. The complexity itself became camouflage. People stopped trying to understand and started trusting authority. And authority said everything was fine, right up until it wasn't. This creates a perverse dynamic. Correct warnings get discredited by their own repetition. If you warn too early, you're ignored. If you wait until it's obvious, there's no time to prepare. The window between vindication and catastrophe is measured in days, and that window is designed to be too narrow for most people. The numbing mechanism works because human psychology adapts to sustained alarm. The first warning triggers attention. The 10th triggers skepticism. The 100th triggers dismissal. It's not stupidity, it's habituation. The nervous system cannot maintain high alert indefinitely, so it recalibrates. What once seemed urgent becomes background noise. What once felt dangerous becomes normal. In 2026, we see this everywhere. Inflation warnings that started in 2020 became routine by 2022. Debt ceiling crises that once panicked markets barely register anymore. Bank stress tests that used to matter now pass without comment. Trade war escalations that would have shocked markets in 2018 are priced in by 2026. The threats didn't shrink. The reaction did. And this isn't limited to finance. Climate warnings follow the same pattern. In the 1990s, predictions of catastrophe carried weight. By 2026, after decades of apocalyptic headlines, public reaction is muted. Not because the science changed, because alarm fatigue is real. The mechanism applies universally. Constant crisis warnings create conditions for crisis to be ignored. The incentive structure guarantees this outcome. Consider the analyst who warns of collapse. If it happens, they're vindicated, but the damage is done. If it doesn't happen, they issue the same warning next year. Their career doesn't depend on being right. It depends on being noticed. Fear sells books. Fear books, speaking engagements. Fear builds audiences. Accuracy is optional. The business model is simple. Predict catastrophe every quarter. Eventually, something bad will happen. When it does, replay your warnings. Claim vindication. Ignore the 99 predictions that failed. Highlight the one that hit. Build a brand on that single success. Then repeat the cycle. The incentive is to be consistently wrong, but memorably right once. Meanwhile, the analyst who says everything is fine gets ignored during good times and blamed during bad times. There's no upside to reassurance. Media won't platform calm analysis. Audiences won't share moderate takes. The algorithm rewards extremes, so extremes proliferate and noise increases. By 2010, financial media had learned the lesson. Every story needed a crisis angle. Stocks hit record highs, frame it as a bubble. Unemployment drops, frame it as unsustainable. GDP grows, frame it as calm before the storm. The narrative structure demanded danger even when data showed stability, because stability doesn't drive engagement. This creates what psychologists call learned helplessness. When every signal suggests danger but no danger materializes, people stop responding to signals. They don't distinguish between real warnings and false ones. They dismiss everything. And when the real crisis arrives, the response is paralysis, not preparation. The 2020 pandemic illustrated this perfectly. In January 2020, early warnings about COVID spread through alternative media. Mainstream outlets dismissed them. By February, some analysts warned of economic lockdowns. Markets ignored them. By March, the warnings were everywhere. But the window to act had already closed. The people who prepared in January looked paranoid. The people who waited for consensus got trapped. The pattern revealed something critical. The early warnings came from sources the system had trained people to dismiss: fringe blogs, obscure analysts, voices without institutional backing. By the time prestigious institutions confirmed the danger, toilet paper was sold out and markets had crashed. The information was available early, but it came from sources pre-labeled as unreliable. The numbing mechanism filtered it out before it could register. In 2026, we're watching the same pattern with different crises. Debt warnings have been constant since 2008. So when sovereign debt actually becomes unsustainable, the reaction will be muted until it's catastrophic. Bank fragility warnings have been routine since 2023. So when the next institution fails, people will assume it's contained until contagion spreads. The numbing is systemic. The structure guarantees that the crowd is always wrong at the turning point. Not because people are stupid, because the information environment creates this outcome. Signal and noise become indistinguishable. The cost of false positives seems higher than false negatives until the crisis hits. Then the calculation reverses instantly, but by then, options have narrowed. History shows that major collapses are always preceded by warning fatigue. The 1929 crash came after a decade of bubble warnings. The 2008 crisis came after years of housing warnings. The Roman currency collapse came after generations of debasement warnings. In every case, the warnings were accurate. And in every case, they were ignored because they'd been repeated too often. Look deeper at 1929. Irving Fisher, one of America's most respected economists, declared stocks had reached a permanently high plateau. 9 days later, the market crashed. But Fisher wasn't lying. He'd heard crash predictions every year since 1925. Every year, the market went higher. By 1929, the warnings had lost credibility, not because the risk disappeared, because the repetition made it invisible. The paradox is brutal. The more you warn, the less effective the warning becomes. The longer the system survives, the more invincible it appears. And the bigger the eventual failure, the more catastrophic the surprise. This isn't a bug. It's a feature of how information moves through complex systems. Early warnings get filtered out as noise. Late warnings arrive too late to matter. In 2026, the numbing mechanism is stronger than ever. We've survived the 2008 crash, the 2020 pandemic, the 2022 inflation spike, and multiple debt ceiling showdowns. Each time the system bent but didn't break. Each time, the doomers were wrong about timing even when right about risk, so the default assumption is that this time will be the same. The system will survive again. Social media accelerates the cycle. In 2010, a crash prediction took weeks to spread. By 2026, it spreads in hours. Algorithmic amplification means the most extreme warnings get the most reach. Nuanced analysis gets buried. The result is a constant stream of maximum severity predictions with minimum credibility. Every day brings a new existential threat. Every week, the system survives. The pattern trains disbelief. That assumption works until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, the collapse is always described as unexpected. Black swan. Once in a century event. Unforeseeable. But it wasn't unforeseeable. It was foreseen repeatedly. The warnings were there. They were drowned out by other warnings that turned out false. The mechanism creates its own cover. When the crisis finally arrives, analysts who warned correctly get dismissed as lucky. Broken clocks, right twice a day. Meanwhile, institutional voices that missed it explain nobody could have known. The narrative protects the system even as it fails. So where does that leave you in 2026? Stuck between two bad options: ignore all warnings and get blindsided, or act on every warning and waste resources on false alarms. The rational middle ground requires distinguishing real signals from noise. But the information environment makes that impossible. The survivors won't be the ones who listen to every warning, and they won't be the ones who ignore everything. They'll be the ones who understand that constant warnings are themselves a warning. Not about the specific crisis being predicted, about the fragility of a system that requires constant reassurance that it's not fragile. When everyone is screaming that the ship is sinking, the ship usually stays afloat. But when nobody believes the ship can sink anymore, that's when you check for lifeboats. Because the numbing mechanism doesn't prevent collapse. It just ensures that when collapse comes, almost nobody is ready. The boy cried wolf until the village stopped listening, then the wolf came. The moral isn't that the boy was lying. The moral is that the truth loses power through repetition. And in 2026, we've been hearing warnings so long that the truth sounds like just another false alarm. That's not an accident. That's the trap. If this changed how you see financial media, share it. Because the next crisis won't announce itself clearly. It'll arrive disguised as another prediction that's been wrong 100 times before.